All right, so we'd like to welcome you all to the Detroit Breaking the Cycle Symposium put on by Players Coalition, Pure Heart Foundation, as well as Flowers of the Future Foundation. We will have our opening remarks from the COO of Marygrove, Rachel Allen. But first, to introduce why we're having this conversation, it's important to address how these problems are impacting Detroit specifically, and then we can address how we plan to solve them. And so by putting together a panel of experts who can best outline paths forward, we hope that this conversation sheds a light on how to move Detroit forward as a city. So panel one will include Jalen Elliott of the Detroit Lions, who is their safety, as the moderator. We'll have, show him some love. We'll have Sherelle Hogan from Pure Heart Foundation, Earl Burton from Michigan Liberation, Ralph Godby, the former Detroit police chief, and then Michael Carter, from the Federal Community Defender Office. So just as a heads up for how tonight will run, we'll have each panel go for about 45 minutes, but we will have about a 15-minute intermission in between the panels. So if you need to get some air or get some water or just take a walk, we'll queue you guys up for that. And to start, I think I forgot to introduce myself. My name's Dr. Chelsea Hayward with Players Coalition. So it's so great to have you guys all here. But to start, if Rachel can come up and welcome the panelists.
All right. Can everybody hear me okay? Awesome. Well, I want to welcome you all to home. This is Marygrove Conservancy, and I have to tell you how exciting it is to see all those little blue shirts in the audience tonight. Because just a year ago, I met with Sherelle Hogan. Sherelle, where are you? There. And she shared with me this vision that she had for the Pure Heart Foundation. She sat across from me and shared with me her personal experience, her lived experience, and why it was so important for her to do this work. And at that time, Pure Heart was looking for a place to expand, to call home. And so it's just a pleasure to see all of those children in the audience, to see all of you here tonight. One of the things that I'm most proud of with Sherelle and Pure Heart is that she is a young lady who is really committed to this work and is about the children that she serves. And so it's a pleasure to be here to introduce tonight's panelists. I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing here at Marygrove and why it's important that this conversation is being had in this place at this time. 2 years ago, Marygrove College closed, and there were people all across the city who thought that this campus would go dark. There was fear that developers would come to this place and graze the 53 acres that we're sitting on in Northwest Detroit and turn this into a gentrified place that people who look like the folks represented in this room don't include. And so a lot of work has gone into making Marygrove a place where especially Black children feel seen, feel appreciated, are heard, are allowed to play on the pianos that are in our rooms, run through the halls, learn here, be educated here. But also, we recognize that we are sitting at the corner of 6 Mile and Wyoming, y'all. Some people like to call it McNichols. I call it 6 Mile because we recognize that we are in the heart of a community that has a lot of challenges. We recognize that there are not a lot of places where Black and brown little boys and girls can come, can have a safe, quality, high-quality education, can have access to the resources that we produce here, which are everything from mentoring, after-school programming, arts, culture, music, dance. We have over 60 organizations, including the Pure Heart Foundation, in residence here at Marygrove, and we do that so that Black boys and girls can feel safe on this campus. What we also know is that if we are not working intentionally to create opportunities for young people, they make choices that are not in their best interests. And I know this through lived experience. I know that as a mother, with even giving my own child the best, whether it was a private school education, a middle-class upbringing, I still have a son that is incarcerated with a life sentence. My son is 20 years old, 6 months ago was sentenced to an unimaginable prison sentence. And so I have to tell you that it's people like me who understand personally why programs like Pure Heart exist and why this work is important. Because what I know for sure is that if young people are not embraced and loved on and supported and almost smothered in resources and support and affirmation and all of the things that it takes to get Black children from one place to the other, we know what the alternative is. So this conversation tonight is important in this place, in this neighborhood, because we are in the neighborhoods. We are in the hearts of where students are making choices that could ultimately change the trajectory of their lives. What I'm hoping is that the young people that are here tonight understand how powerful and dynamic the diversity that you see being represented is. This is not just about let's have a conversation about how we keep people out of jail. This is about how do we tear down and dismantle the systems that make it so easy for young people to get themselves entangled. The panel that we're going to have tonight are people who have committed their lives and their work and their professions and their personal experience to this work, and I applaud that. And I think it's super important that we give young people a real conversation about what this means. And so I am honored tonight to be able to introduce this panel here at home. I've been affiliated with Marygirl for about 20 years. I was a high school dropout, a teen mom, catching 3 buses from the east side, coming to Marygrove as a college student. So to be here tonight, opening up my home to you all, is an honor. But most importantly, what I really hope we leave you with this evening is to feel challenged about not just having another conversation about the justice system and what it means to be incarcerated. Let's make sure that we are talking about the real solutions, like the work that Pure Heart Foundation is doing, like the work that some of these other organizations are doing, that are loving on Black children so that when they have difficult choices to make that could ultimately impact their lives, they are choosing to come to places where they can be seen, be heard, be supported, and that people like you can continue to be a part of the solution. So I welcome you this evening to Marygrove Conservancy. I thank you for bearing with us. We're a 100-year-old building, so we don't have no AC, y'all. I'm real sorry about that. But we hope that you will stick around for the robust conversation, for the hors d'oeuvres prepared here, fresh food on our campus prepared by Pharmacy Food. So shout out to Pharmacy Food, who does all of our healthy meals for students here on campus. And so I really appreciate the panel here for this evening and look forward to being part of the conversation. Thank you so much.
So before we jump fully into the panel, one thing that's most important to this conversation is while we have conversations about youth, something that's often overlooked is including the youth in those conversations. So we wanted to invite a Pure Heart scholar to share her story so it can really put a face to an issue as to why these conversations are so important to be had. So with that, I'd like to invite up Adriana.
Hi everybody. Can y'all hear me? My name is Adriana Rogers. I am a Pure Heart Scholar alumni. I graduated out of Pure Heart in 2018. Bear with me, guys. Bear with me. I currently have a mother incarcerated. Growing up, my dad was in and out of prison. Growing up, life was difficult. As I look at all the kids that walked in today, they kind of remind me of me and my siblings. It was 9 of us. We used to all come in packs. Everybody would just say that we were the party itself. I got up here and I knew exactly what I was going to say. I knew how I was going to start. I was going to start with a disclaimer and everything, but I didn't realize that I didn't have to even apologize for living the life that I did or going through anything or being here. I just want to thank you all for supporting us. It takes a lot. It does. It's taken a lot for me to even be up here, to even start. I don't even know where to start, actually. I told Miss Sherelle I had it. I told her I was going to wing it off the dome.
You got it. You doing it.
Jeez, yeah.
So she wants me to help her. So I'm going to boast on Adriana. So when I met Adriana, she was in high school, right? And her mother was incarcerated and who is still currently incarcerated. And she was having a hard time emotionally trying to navigate and make sure that she kept her grades up and that she was a big sister for her siblings. And when I took Adriana on as a mentee, she just was like, Miss Sherelle, I give so much to all of my siblings, it's nothing left for myself. So every time we had an interaction, I made sure that Adriana had the support that she needed. Because although her mother is incarcerated and she's an older sister, she still matters. Her story still matters. Her emotional needs still matters. So I am so proud of Adriana, and I always, whenever I have an opportunity to, give her the space to tell her story, because Adriana graduated high school. Adriana is in college. I'm not done yet. Adriana has her own business, too.
3 of them.
Okay, see that? You got it from here? So that's why it was so important for y'all to hear her story.
That's it. Okay. So, it wasn't easy getting here. I had my grandparents. It's usually the other parent that steps in. My dad played his part. I cannot discredit my dad, but my grandparents are what made me who I am. I lived with my grandparents on and off since I was about 7 years old. I grew up raising my brothers and sisters. I was what you call a stay-at-home big sister. I didn't go to school. I didn't do kid activities. I didn't do a lot of things. But I felt my purpose was to be what my sisters and brothers needed me to be. Growing up, I seen what I didn't want to be like, as most of us seen, the people we wanted to be. So for my sisters and brothers, I became the uplift and the shining bright star, as she would call me, so that they can have something to be inspired by, so that they won't be scared and they will always know that they can do whatever they want, no matter who we're up against or where we are or the circumstances that we're put in. Most of my tears are not because I'm sad, y'all. I'm very happy. I'm very, very happy. I'm very happy, yes. And I can finally say that. It took a long time. I just turned 21 August 4th. I have no criminal record. I am in school. I studied business at first, but they weren't teaching me anything that I didn't already know. So I am now in college for culinary arts, and I am looking forward to opening my restaurant and servicing you all. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana, for sharing your story with us. I know it's not easy, but we'd like to invite the first panel to come up. And for those of you that are in the back with the fans, for those of you on the panel, if you can speak into the mic so everyone can hear what you're saying. We'd like to bring up Sherelle. You can come up, yep. Earl Burton of Michigan Liberation. Ralph Godby, former Detroit police chief. Michael Carter of the Federal Community Defender Office. And then Jalen Elliott of the Detroit Lions will moderate tonight's panel.
Hello. All right, so we're gonna get started with the first panel. I just want to thank everybody for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And we're gonna start off with Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter, please tell us a little bit about the work of the Federal Defender's Office.
All right, can everybody hear me? No, yes, no? All right, so I'm Mike Carter. I'm the chief of the Federal Defender's Office here in Detroit, Michigan. And what the Federal Defender's Office does, we represent everybody who gets charged with a federal crime from Detroit to Jackson to Ann Arbor, all the way up to Bay City, Saginaw, and Flint. So all that area from Bay City all the way down, that's what we represent. So anybody charged with a federal crime, it comes through our office. Unfortunately, most people who are charged with crimes, period, can't afford a retained lawyer. So it's my job to either either give that individual a lawyer or assign him a lawyer from our panel. So that's technically that's what we do. We have mitigation specialists, we have investigators, we have a whole army of people to represent our clients. But really what we do on a day-to-day basis is what you just saw Adriana and the other young lady who was up here speaking. What we do is we give stories and we give voices to our clients. All of our clients come in with, I curse a lot, so I'm gonna try my best because there's kids in here and this is recorded and I see people's faces, so I'm not gonna do that. But everybody that comes in my office, they come from a very, very, very messed up background. My clients have gone through unmentionable trauma. They have significant mental health issues. They come from the trauma of violence or having an incarcerated parent or growing up in a neighborhood where killing is just normal. And so when they get to us, we're dealing with all of that. And for the most part, in the federal system, not a lot of folks go to trial because, the feds have a 95% conviction rate. So really unfortunately, it's about humanizing your client to these police officers, to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and to these judges. And that sounds crazy because, of course, everybody should have a presumption of humanity, right? But unfortunately, when you get charged with a crime, that presumption, it's gone. And so it's a lot of times it's up to your attorney, us, to figure out the angles and to tell your story to whatever audience you're in front of. And I got to tell you that I've been doing this almost over 15 years, and I've never had a client, I don't care what they've been accused of, whether it's murder, drugs, rape, whatever. I have never had a client who has not come from a background that will send you to the floor. The stuff that my client sees, the stuff that they go through each and every day, it is amazing that they are standing. So again, that's what we do. It's our job when they get charged with crimes, when we are presenting their cases to judges or to prosecutors, it is our job to tell them where they come from. So that's what we do.
Definitely. And so as you just kind of touched on, you represent people that are charged with serious crimes. Can you kind of share what you've identified as factors that lead people into this criminal legal system?
Yeah, I could try to do that in 3 minutes. Well, I guess if you just want to put a category on it, it's racism. And that sounds crazy to some, maybe not. But the majority of my clients come from eerily similar backgrounds, right? And these backgrounds were created by a number of things. They were created by housing discrimination. They were created by lack of quality education. They were created by, cutting social services, single-parent homes where moms or fathers are having to work 2 jobs and kids are just left alone. They're created by this need that all of us have, but especially as a young person, of wanting to be, just loved and cared for. So a lot of times the streets provides that for a lot of my clients. And so these lack of resources that, this country has stripped from our communities, it's created this revolving door for our clients, right? It's not, I used to do juvenile work. And so, I'll get a 12-year-old, 13-year-old who is still in middle school, but you see it starting, right? Either mother's incarcerated or mother's just not around, dad is incarcerated, grandma's raising them. Grandma can't really, he's young, he's out in the street all the time, and so he's not listening to grandma, he's listening to his other friends, and they start getting into trouble, more and more and more. And it becomes normal to the clients. So they start in juvenile, and they start coming in, and they're seeing their friends in juvenile, and it's almost cool, right? And then they graduate to adult. And it's interesting, as many people, if you go down to Frank Murphy right now, and you go to felony court, a lot of those brothers know each other, and they've known each other for years, right? Because it's just so embedded in some communities, this criminality, and it's really unfortunate because it's not our fault. We didn't create this system, but that's really what happened. So whether it's poverty that you're looking at, whether it's the lack of a role model, which is a very overly simplistic way to put things, but when you grow up in certain environments like that, when you don't think that you can be anything other than being on the street, it is very hard to kind of reconfigure somebody's brain and get them on the right path. And with the lack of role models, unfortunately, they come down to that system.
For sure. So we've talked about some of the obstacles in their backgrounds. What are some of the obstacles that you see while they're fighting their cases? And what are some ways that your office works to address them?
So a lot of times when people brought into the criminal legal system and they're assigned a public defender, a lot of times that public defender doesn't have a lot of resources. So if the client is lucky to be out in the community fighting his or her case, you have obstacles of, really come down to the lawyer a lot. The lawyers may not keep that client engaged, like not communicating with the client. Clients don't know the law, and so they don't understand what's going on, and the lawyer's not keeping them up to speed on what's going on in the case. But a lot of the times when we're talking about fighting your case, the clients are fighting from the inside. They're incarcerated. They can't get a bond. And so that brings a whole host of problems, from simple things just as calling somebody on the phone because of the exorbitant amount of cost just to make a collect phone call. Trusting the lawyer is an obstacle, because everybody in here knows that if you get a public defender, the people believe that lawyer is not going to fight for you. So you're stuck with this. You haven't selected your lawyer. You don't know what's going on with your case. You have no idea. You don't have enough funds to call into the community to figure out what's going on. All of these obstacles create it's almost unbearable for clients sometimes when they're fighting a case from the inside, because that anxiety overcomes you. And then a lot of times you're prone to make a bad decision. And what I mean by that is, you'll have a situation where a client might be looking at, a 25-year mandatory minimum. And maybe the case is awful, right? There is no way to beat it. There is no issue, there's no motion to file. There's nothing but me coming to the prosecutor and begging him to let go of that mandatory minimum and give him something that he can live with, where he can come out and see his kids, right? And you beg, you work it up, you interview family members, you talk to his church, you get all these great letters, and you come to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor says, I feel you, I hear you, I understand what you're saying. I'll cut the 25 years, and you can argue for 10, whatever. It's still a lot of time, but it's not 25 years. But while you're doing all that, and because maybe you're not doing your job as a lawyer and communicating this to the client, and the client can't call and see what's going on, the client's listening to everybody in the jail. And the jail's like, he ain't doing nothing for you. That lawyer ain't nothing. He working for the government, da-da-da-da-da. And so by the time you get to him with this good deal, he doesn't believe anything you're saying. And that's not his fault. That's your fault. That's our fault, right? So, that's a huge obstacle is the lack of communication between lawyers and clients, which sometimes leads clients to make decisions that are not in their best interest.
For sure, and you touched on it a little bit, but based on your experience, what are some ideas or ways for judges and the judges and prosecutors can use their roles to reduce the mass incarceration?
Stop locking everybody up. I don't know. Prosecutors, I guess they could I'm cynical when it comes to this. I don't like prosecutors. Judges, they are what they are, but prosecutors have a lot of discretion. They have a lot of power. Don't let anybody fool you. They have the most power in this system, right? Their charging decisions, the neighborhoods they want to focus on, the types of crimes they want to charge, that's all up to them. All of it, right? So if you live in a city where a group of prosecutors get bored and they want to mess with some folks who are from a certain neighborhood, they're going to do it. And so I guess, I don't know how you fix that. I guess, in a perfect world, you would ask that prosecutors exercise their discretion with, more carefully. They start with the presumption of humanity instead of making us convince them of a client's humanity. They understand what, they have a better understanding of where people come from and why people make the decisions that they make, and not feel like the ultimate solution always has to be prison. And judges, a lot of times the judges' hands are tied. But a lot of times they aren't. And I think that what judges can do best is not be so cynical. Check the cynicism at the door. It's real easy in this system, as I've never been a judge, but as a judge, you see one client after the other, especially if you're not from that community, you start thinking this is how everybody is, and you stop listening to client stories. And I think judges they take an oath and they have an obligation to check that cynicism at the door. A practical thing that judges can do is not always believe the police. There are a lot of times where search warrants come across a judge's desk. And anytime you get a search warrant, in order for an officer to take a search warrant to somebody's house and come in that house, they have to have what they call probable cause, which basically means you got to have reason to believe there's drugs or evidence of a crime in this house. Now, a lot of times as a defense attorney, I'll look at a search warrant and I'll look at it and I'll say, there's nothing here. Like, I don't see how a judge signed this. And then we'll file a motion and we'll get it dismissed. But yeah, and that's great that it gets dismissed, but for 8 months, this client has been fighting this case where illegal evidence was gained from an unlawful and an unconstitutional search. So I think a lot of times that stops at the door of judge. If it gets past the prosecutor, judges have an obligation to look at search warrants, to listen to police testimony with a healthy suspicion. Because I don't care what people say, test of lying is real. Police officers get up on the stand every day in every courthouse and lie. They just do, and that's the truth. And judges know it, and prosecutors know it. And so I think they all have an obligation. I can't put up a witness that says, I know it's gonna lie, I'll get in trouble. So I think we need to hold their feet to the fire a little bit more.
Definitely, we appreciate your knowledge on that and your input. Now we'll move on to Mr. Gabi. Thank you for joining us today, first and foremost. And we just want to start off with what are some ways that discriminatory policing contribute to mass incarceration?
It's not some ways, it completely contributes to it. You have to understand the foundation of how policing came about in America to understand why black and brown communities are so disadvantaged. The history of policing in the United States comes from what's called slave patrols. And if you understand where policing came from, it came from a predicate of controlling black and brown behavior through fear, violence, and intimidation. If you fast forward through Reconstruction, fast forward through Emancipation Proclamation, fast forward through the Jim Crow era, fast forward through Rodney King, fast forward to George Floyd, ostensibly policing has not changed in the United States. It's about controlling black and brown behavior through fear, violence, and intimidation. As the counselor referred to, there has to be a complete overhaul of how we do policing in the United States. Systemic racism is real. And what I learned very quickly in my career in law enforcement, a lot of people join for noble reasons and they join for the right reason. But once you get into it, you can be a good police officer. You could be a good sergeant, you could be a good lieutenant, you could be a good chief of police. I thought I was an excellent chief of police. I thought I reached the community. I thought I had a police department that I made sure that we honored the citizens' rights. But I was one police chief out of 18,000 in the United States of America. The majority of the police departments in the United States of America are not ethnic majority. They're non-black. And if you look at the systems across the country, if you fix one police department, you still got 17,999 to go. So there has to be some federal intervention. There has to be some way of leveling the playing field so there's equity in how we police communities. Counsel referred to discretion. Police officers have way too much discretion. And I'll give you an example. If you look at the gentleman that was killed by accident when the officer grabbed their gun instead of a taser, the initial stop was for a air freshener hanging from his rearview mirror. Why is that a primary stop? Because in discretion, if you saw a person that was non-black driving in an affluent community with a upper class vehicle, there's no way in the world police would stop that same individual. So we use these pretexts as reasons to stop black and brown individuals, and we don't do it equally or with equity across the board. That would have saved that young man's life. George Floyd. Let's presuppose that the $20 bill was counterfeit. Local police departments don't deal with counterfeit money. The United Secret Service does. So at the very worst case, you confiscate the $20, you put it on evidence, you identify who the man is, you get an out-of-custody warrant, you deal with it in court. Another life would have been saved. So until we address the systems of policing and how we engage and give officers so much discretion, we're going to continue to have the same thing. Not long after George Floyd's death, there were over 60 deaths at the hands of police, black and brown individuals, unarmed, that happened before the trial was even completed. So until we start to make those substantive changes relative to how we engage communities, black people are no more subject to commit crime than white people. And then we use the black on black crime thing. So let me disabuse everybody of this. 85% of white crime victims, guess what? The perpetrator is white. Yet you never hear anybody saying that we have a white on white crime problem. This is out of control. What are we gonna do about these out of control white people? We don't do that. However, every time we talk about correcting police behavior, then we default back to, well, what about black on black crime? Crime is a measure of proximity and opportunity. It has nothing to do with, I commit a crime against you because of the color of your skin. And the ones that do, they walk around free every day waving swastikas and had an insurrection on January 6th. So we can fix it, but we have to have the political resolve to change the system.
Definitely. And so with that being said, what are some incidents or types of harm that police currently respond to that you think would be better addressed by different types of service providers?
Let me take it a couple of ways. First of all, a lot of mental health issues. So when people are against defunding the police, they don't understand the context of what that means. Because governments have defunded black communities forever. They close mental health facilities. They close our access to health care. They give us schools that are funded disproportionately to suburban neighborhoods. So defunding is a regular thing that is done in black communities. So when we talk about defunding police departments, what you need to do is some of the funding, because it's amazing how politicians can find funds to fight crime and be tough on crime and get tougher on crime. Those same resources, instead of hiring more police officers, what if we have more social workers in schools? What if we have more clinical psychologists in schools and psychiatrists? Because I was also chief of police of Detroit Public Schools. And what I found is that young people have such a difficult time overcoming so many obstacles just to get to school, that the fact that our young people get to school at all, we should be having a parade as celebrating the tenacity of these young people to get to school in spite of their circumstances. But even when they get through all of that, there's so much trauma left on that individual. We need to have ACEs done for every child that goes to a school. ACEs is Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey. We need to understand the trauma of a child, because if you don't address the trauma, then the trauma turns into a mental health issue. If you don't address the mental health issue, then the mental health issue turns into a criminal issue. Because if you call the police to a mental health situation, the only tool they have in their toolbox is a law enforcement remedy. There's a saying that if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem becomes a nail. And that's what happens in black communities when we defund the infrastructure of a black community to where the housing is substandard. Kids have to walk past houses with grass higher than them to get to school. They have to walk back past houses where they've been on a demolition list for 10, 15, 20 years. Our kids have to go through that to get to school. So when we talk about defunding, and I'm a cop, 30 years, 35 years, I'm a cop. And I'm telling you, the conversation has to be had. And it has to be had in a way, because that's another way to break the cycle. Because the reason why a lot of these young people sit here with parents that are incarcerated is the very fact that, number one, we over-incarcerate black and brown people because we over-police the communities. And we enforce things that have nothing to do with the quality of life, of protecting black and brown life. But it's all about a system that is not favorable towards black and brown men. And when you take black men out of communities, then you got a huge problem, because now you have babies raising babies. You have babies having babies, and you don't have grown people, grown men and grown women to create community norms. So that's why we really have to have a very intelligent conversation about defunding, reorganizing police, reorienting it, and then applying resources so that we can help our young people in the first place.
Definitely. We appreciate you, Mr. Garvey, for sitting on the panel. Now we're going to move on to Mr. Burton. Tell us a little bit about the work that the Michigan Liberation is doing and some of the issues that you're working to address.
Well, thank you, Jalen. Michigan Liberation is a criminal justice reform organization, and our goal is to end mass incarceration. Some of the campaigns we're working on are End Cash Bail, which disproportionately affects the black and brown community and criminalizes poverty. Also, we have Connecting Families, in which we seek to lower the cost of phone calls for those incarcerated persons so that they can maintain contact with their families and loved ones. We have the Good Time, Restore Good Time, which we know incentivizes rehabilitation. We have the Clean Slate Act, which we are also a campaign where we want to have certain felonies or misdemeanors removed from your record after a certain amount of time, because those serve as barriers to jobs, housing, and other things. We also have Care Not Criminalization, which deals with issues of addiction and mental health, you know. And I personally, I'm bottom lining the End Cash Bill campaign that we have, because I personally experienced people who've lost their jobs, lost their cars or whatnot, simply because they were targeted, as Gabi was saying, along the major thoroughfares like 8 Mile that separates Detroit from the suburbs. You know, we've seen where they like target older vehicles, which they figure don't have insurance or can't pay it or whatnot. One community that we were court watching in, the population of that community was 80%, less than 10% black. But we court watched, and 80% of the people that came in front of the court were black people from Detroit. So that's another one of the issues that we're working on. Excuse me, I have to refer to some of my notes. I'm a little bit nervous. I also am a member of the BOSS Squad. BOSS is an acronym for the Bailout Super Squad, where we don't just talk about ending cash bail. We put our money where our mouth is. We go bail the people out of the county jails that are in there simply because they can't afford to pay their bail.
Definitely. For sure. And how does community organizing kind of help tackle these issues?
Well, by engaging the community, we find the issues that are important to the people of the community, and we bring those issues to the attention of our elected officials. We do that by way of advocacy, we do that by lobbying our elected officials, and we do it by direct actions if we need to. We serve to be a voice for the voiceless.
Sure. And lastly, how does your personal experience inform the work that you have engaged in?
Well, my personal experience, I'm formerly incarcerated. I spent a total of 39 years in prison. The last one was 28 years and 2 months, where I was just recently released a couple of years ago, and I became a member of Michigan Liberation. So my personal experience with this, where some people see these issues in the abstract, I actually have personal knowledge of these, which not only inflames my passion for this work, but it also allows me to speak with knowledge from personal experience.
For sure. Thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you.
And lastly, we have Sherelle. Thank you to you and the Pure Heart Foundation for helping us put this panel on today. One of the reasons why we're here is to unpack the impact of mass incarceration and the effect that it has on children and incarcerated parents. Often no one really ever considers the child. So can you speak further on, how children are impacted when they have an incarcerated parent or loved one?
Absolutely. And thank you, Jalen, for hosting the panel. And thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. Thank you to my Pure Heart scholars for being in the building this evening. Can we all give them a round of applause? So before I answer your question, I just want to throw out a couple of statistics that I think is very critical for everyone to understand on why we're here tonight. So parental incarceration is a national problem that Pure Heart and other organizations is fighting to dismantle and to break that cycle. 10 million children in the US has had a parent incarcerated before reaching the age of 10. 2.7 million children currently have a parent incarcerated. 228,000 young people in Michigan has had a parent incarcerated before reaching the age of 10 years old. That's 1 out of 10 in Michigan, 4 out of 10 in Detroit. Statistics suggest that 80% of those young people, just because they have a parent incarcerated, will enter the criminal justice system. If you have a parent incarcerated, you are 7 times more likely to enter criminal justice system before reaching high school, or let alone graduating high school. Out of all of the young people that has a parent incarcerated, it's a 2% chance that children of incarcerated parents will attend college and graduate. So when you talk about systemic racism in the school-to-prison pipeline system, this is a system that literally was designed to target children of incarcerated parents. So what the school-to-prison pipeline system is, it is something that the government created to determine whether they'll put our kids in a college dorm or a jail cell based on their 3rd grade reading level. So children of incarcerated parents, they're affected emotionally, psychologically, financially, and some of the barriers that they're challenged with is 73% of young people with a parent incarcerated has some type of form of abuse that's being done to them immediately when they're separated from their parent. 56% of children of incarcerated parents enter the foster care system. 23% of the children of incarcerated parents face homelessness, and the list goes on. They're faced with so many barriers, and I think the biggest barrier is that no one addresses them. No one sees about young people experiencing parental incarceration. It is not a law, it is not a policy, it is not nothing in place that provides immediate intervention to this child. And it's nothing. It's nothing for them. And I'm so passionate because I can remember being a little girl watching not my mother and my father be handcuffed when I was 6 and 7 years old, and no one knew my whereabouts. No one knew if I was safe. No one knew that I was being neglected. No one knew that I was being abused. I was left through the cracks to face all type of barriers. So when you talk about resiliency, when you talk about breaking the cycle, when you talk about all of these systems that was placed to, end their chance to become fit citizens in this community, you have to address that their parent is incarcerated because they're overlooked in so many spaces. So I'm so grateful to be here tonight, creating a space where their stories and their barriers are being addressed.
Definitely. Last question for you. What are some of the solutions that you think would help to keep these families together?
Absolutely. So along with providing wraparound services in the community for children experiencing parental incarceration and their caregivers, I think that the system needs to be more lenient when it comes to children visiting their parents, staying connected to their parents. The rigorous and strenuous application that young people have to fill out to see their parent is unacceptable. And then all of the documentation that they require for the person that's bringing them to see their parent that's incarcerated. It's so many loopholes that they have to jump through in order to stay connected. And when a child stays connected to their parent that's incarcerated, their behavioral and emotional well-being increases by 79%. A parent that's incarcerated, they stay connected with their child, they have a 84%, I believe, chance of not reoffending. So keeping that family connected is so critical. Making sure that they have support, making sure that parenting classes are in place, making sure that criminal justice systems are benefiting our young people and their families and their well-being will really help break that cycle. In a perfect world, Pure Heart doesn't need to exist because no one's in prison. No one is being stripped away from their children. But that's not the world we're living in right now, so I'm just encouraging everyone, even after tonight, to continue this conversation and keep talking about how we can see effective change.
Wow. Yeah, well, we thank you for your work, and we thank everybody on the panel for taking time to come and have this conversation. It's disheartening, the things that are, trying to stifle this community, and I think it's so important for us to have conversations like this, and for people in my shoes and my platform to be able to come and show my face and be here and really take this serious, And I'm encouraged by the work that you guys are doing, and I know that we're headed in the right direction. And I think we just need to continue to have these conversations and continue to push the line and continue to be better as a community. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your time on this panel tonight. Thank you, Jalen. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Ralph. Thank you, Sherelle. And thank you, Earl. Can we get one more round of applause for this panel? So the purpose of that panel was really to break down how we can dismantle systems of incarceration, and the next panel is going to address how we can identify the impact of mass incarceration. But we're going to take a quick break because I know it's still a little warm in here. So there's food still in the lobby. Please eat that so it doesn't go to waste. And we'll meet back in here in 10 minutes. All right. So that first panel, we spent dismantling systems of incarceration, and so now we want to get into how to identify and address the impact. So now that we know what the problems are, how is this impacting individual lives? And that's really, for those of you that are unfamiliar with Players Coalition, what our work is about, is finding that systemic change. And so through the work of professional athletes, we've been able to get 24 different pieces of legislation changed across the country. And so we're really proud of Trey and Jalen here today. And them lending their platforms to figure out solutions to these problems that we know and have solutions for, but for whatever reason, our politicians aren't pushing as fast as our athletes are. So with the second panel, I'd like to introduce Kimberly Woodson of Michigan Liberation, Ashley Carter of Advancement Project, who helped put this panel together. Thank you, Ashley. Randy David of Detroit Public Health. And then Aaron Keith. Sorry, with Detroit Justice Center. And then with that, we'll have our moderator, Trey Flowers of the Detroit Lions, an outside linebacker.
Hello? Yeah, got it. All right, thanks for everybody coming out tonight. Good faces in the crowd. Got to interact with some kids. That's my specialty, just interaction. I love kids, man, good energy, so that was good. They wanted me to follow them on Instagram, so shout them out. Whatever, yeah, I see y'all. But let's get to the questions. It's my first question for Kimberly Woodson. Just found out she was my cousin. We got family, so shout out, cuz.
Hey, cuz.
Thank you for being here today, Ms. Woodson. To start off, What are some obstacles formerly incarcerated people face when they re-enter society and work and rebuild their lives?
First, I want to say thank you for having me. When you first enter into society, if you don't have like basic things like your social security card or your ID, that can be an obstacle in itself off the beginning. It can take you months because you need a social security card to get an ID, and you need an ID to get a social security card. And MDOC thinks that when you leave prison, that they prison ID that they give you is sufficient enough for you to be saying, this is me. It only works for you to be identified as a number to MDOC. So that obstacle is very challenging because you can't get a job without your social security card, and you can't prove who you are to begin to even make a living. So automatically the odds are stacked against you. If you are on active parole, most people will not rent to you or lease to you. That becomes a habit. And it's like, what do I do? Do I become homeless? Do I go to a world of crime? Do I try to force my way into a situation? It's like those simple things as basic needs, like where do I sleep? What do I eat? How do I start re-entering myself into society and become productive? And MDOC do not do re-entry properly. It's a 90-day thing, and you maybe have 3 or 4 call-outs, and they really push you out the door because they don't care, because their job is to try to get you back in. So automatically, if you black and brown, the odds are very stacked against you. So
It's good to hear. Clap, clap, clap. To take that a level deeper, from your perspective, how does this system unjustly impact women specifically?
wow, that's a loaded question, so thank you for asking that. For me personally, as a female, I went in at 17, and I came out at 47. Yes, do the math. And so I went in from my mom's home to prison to getting out to my brother's home. So I never drove a car, and it was a lot of things I'd never done. So I was trying to navigate my way through the city of Detroit, and we know we have some rough spots. And for someone who's been gone for 29 years, you don't really know the familiar landmarks no more. And it was a few times I got lost catching a bus and ended up in the wrong neighborhood. And it was only because I was taking carpentry class that I had tools on me that I was able to stop from being attacked in the wrong way, because I was like, nigga, I hit you with this hammer. Sorry, I don't cut, kids. Don't hit people with hammer, kids. Please don't do that. I'm sorry. But it was like, they don't realize that women face obstacles just by safety alone. If you ever seen a brother get out of prison after they did a bit, you see they big, they buff, they look like, do not mess with me. On the other hand, a woman, we ain't got those kind of like, ooh, don't mess with me. Even a big man gonna look at me and say, I don't care how buff you are, I can take you. So it's like obstacles. And then if we have kids that they waiting on us to come home, the caregiver, most thing they say is, ooh, I can't wait for your mama to get here. Ooh, I can't wait for your daddy to get here. And the kids, they begin to feel like the mom is gonna answer all of their prayers as soon as they touch down. And that's not the case, because we don't have all the answers, and we don't have all the resources, and we don't have the support that we need as a woman to step into motherhood, let alone a new, fresh womanhood to define who you are as a woman. And lots of time, returning citizen females end up in situations out of desperation where they end up living with a man that they really don't care or know. And that man can lead them back into a life of crime, or it can be successful like myself. I ended up being married with a baby, but that was my take. But my sister had picked my husband before I ever came home. So, yeah, she did. So that being said, what if somebody is not there to support them? They face so many different obstacles. And please don't be black and brown, because you don't get a shot. Because most of society look at black women and feel like you should never have walked away from your kids. It should have been nothing that should have caused you to leave your kids. But taking care and providing for those kids can be the very thing that causes a mom to have to go to jail in the first place.
That's real, that's real. Last question for you. How can communities use their individual and collective power to advocate for themselves and demand change?
First of all, everybody in here, you have a voice. Even the babies. Your voices are more important than anybody. If you see something's not right, speak up, say it. Tell your friend, hey, that's not right. What should we do about this? You get together and you make people that have like minds and know that things not right, and you get together and you organize and you get other people on board and you explain to them and you educate them why you feel like this is not right. And you use your voices and you use your people and you connect and you change it. Nothing is set in stone. You are the future. The laws are yours to make. It's up to you to decide what laws you're going to be governed by. Don't let the Constitution that's been there for hundreds of years dictate your future. You can change it if it's up to you. Use your voice, community.
Great answer, great answer. Now this questions for Ms. Ashley Carter. Ms. Carter, how are women and girls, trans and gender, non-conforming people uniquely impacted by mass incarceration?
So you started us off beautifully. But there are a lot of unique issues for people, not just women, but people who are gender non-conforming, transgender people, and people who are kind of on a spectrum of sexuality. And what we know right now is that when you think about mass incarceration and when you think about how the issues are being presented, usually you only hear about men, and usually men are centered in these conversations. And so a lot of the facilities that are designed to house people that are charged with crimes or people that have been convicted of crimes are not really designed or equipped to deal with women. So if you think about the biological needs of women, a lot of jails and prisons really don't provide the feminine products that people need. And I mean, it seems like as a civilized society, we could agree that everyone should have the feminine products that they need, but unfortunately, that's something that people are fighting for. And then we also see women being kind of abused by law enforcement and using those things and kind of holding them hostage and taking advantage of incarcerated women who need those products. Another thing is more women than people would think are arrested when they're pregnant. I think nationally about 9,000 women go to jail when they're pregnant. And of course, a jail is not really a place for anyone, but it's certainly not a place for a pregnant woman. And so a lot of women are forced to deliver their children while incarcerated, and a lot of women even have to deliver their children shackled to the bed in a prison, and on average spend, I think, between 24 and 48 hours with their child before it's taken away from them. So those are a couple examples for women who are incarcerated. Another area of the criminal legal system that really gets overlooked is the child welfare system. So a lot of women, I think 80% of women who are in jail are mothers, which means that there are a lot of children with incarcerated mothers, which is something that has been centered in the conversation tonight. And so we know that there are not only women being criminalized for a wide range of things, from what some people would say are serious crimes, all the way to what we consider crimes of poverty, so things like stealing. In Michigan, one of the big issues is people getting arrested and locked up for driving without car insurance or driving with an unregistered vehicle and going to jail for that. And so as a result of incarceration, a lot of people lose their children. And what we see with mass incarceration and how it most aggressively impacts men, with women, we see the child welfare system being used to criminalize and abuse women and separate families. And so when we talk about mass incarceration, we should also talk about the child welfare system, which is in this country a $1 billion industry, and also thinking about how much money goes into taking people's children and then paying someone else to raise them, instead of just providing people with the resources that they actually need to take care of their families. Because one thing we do to women in particular is we criminalize poverty. And as a result of that, we see a lot of families being separated.
Great answer, great answer. Gotta protect the women, definitely. Another one for you. A lot of people talk about bail. What is bail, and how does it impact people who have a criminal case?
So tonight on the first panel, we heard a bit about, you heard from the police chief who was talking about officers arresting people. And so when someone has a criminal case, it's a long road. And it starts, we learned tonight, from a lot of things like poverty and racism, and goes all the way until someone's released from jail and prison. And so bail is after someone's been arrested, they go in front of a judge. And the judge hears from the prosecutor about what the person's being accused of doing. And so then the judge makes a decision of whether or not the person should go home to fight their criminal case, or if they have to be held inside of jail while they wait for their case to be decided. In this country, we have what's called a presumption of innocence. That means that even when you've been arrested, you are presumed innocent until you're found guilty. But for a lot of communities, and particularly Black and brown communities, there is no presumption of innocence. We're automatically assumed to be guilty, even before we've ever gone in front of a judge, even before we've ever had a jury, even before we've ever gotten to speak to a lawyer. So bail is a tool that basically keeps people in jail while they're fighting their case. And we know that bail disproportionately impacts communities of color. And something else that's really crazy about bail, particularly in Detroit, sometimes people are locked in jail for a bail amount that's like $200. So think about being in jail, which absolutely nobody wants to be there, and not having one person in your life that has $200 to bail you out. And so we call those like, it's the criminalization of poverty, but it's also like a prison that you kind of have to pay for your freedom. And so bail is a way to force people to pay for their freedom while their case is being processed. And something else I just want to note is that a lot of times really rich people can be accused of really serious cases, but they don't have to spend a day in jail because they have the money to pay their bail. Whereas a lot of poor people are charged with very small, ridiculous crimes like stealing from like a corner store or a Target, and they don't have like $1,000 or even sometimes, like I said, $200 to pay. And so they're being criminalized for their inability to pay and forced to sit in jail and prison, or jail, while they fight their case.
That's good information. Well put, well put. Clap it up, clap, clap. All right, this is a question for Mr. Randy David. So, Mr. David, what are some of the ways that arrest, incarceration can impact a person's mental health?
Yeah, I would say that this is such a complex question that I think that many of the panelists here today have spoken on, that I would think as the mental health impact as, frankly, the tip of the spear. And what I mean by that is that many of the other issues that have been brought up today are really more fundamental in many ways, and mental health crises, for instance, are often the end consequence of those inequalities and so forth. I would just like to say, preface this with a few things. One is that, working in epidemiology, a lot of my day goes to the COVID pandemic as of now. But I think it's so important that we're here today, lest we forget the centuries-old epidemic that this is. And this is, by every definition, an epidemic. And I think, as some of the panelists said here, it's rooted very much in structural change, in structural issues, and I think a lot of the solutions are going to be structural. And as the former police chief mentioned, I think that a lot of them are going to, at least ultimately, require a federal response. So just as an example, I would say that if we, there's been so much experiential knowledge given today, and I don't have that experiential knowledge that some of the other panelists here have. However, I would propose, for instance, one quick theoretical mind experiment, in other words. So when the framers of this country, created the Congress and the House of Representatives, they weighted small states to have relatively more power than the large states for their representation. Why? Because they knew that there's a flaw with democracy. And that flaw is that the majority always rules, even if they're wrong. And so what I would propose to say is that states like Rhode Island and Alaska and whatnot had a greater amount of representation. That, to me, is the same fundamental question that's occurring here. We have a problem that's disproportionately affecting, individuals of color, communities of color, but yet, unless we are treated equally, then you're always going to see the majority ruling out. So how do you affect a system where a group that's a minority, any type of minority, has a higher representation per capita, per individual, than the majority? And until we get to that point, until we affect that system, then I think it's going to be very difficult to make any fundamental change. One thing I also want to mention is, the health department is working, for instance, on, as again, the former police chief mentioned, developing communities and developing pride in communities. And so one of the questions we're asking, and one of the things that, I would like to learn more from community organizations about, because I'm a scientist, I don't have that experiential data, but one of the things we're trying to do is, how do you create a system, right, where it's already unequal? So you're not starting from an equal playing field, but you don't want certain resources in a community to be owned by the few, because then no one cares except those few people, right? And they might not even be from that community. That's an oligarchy, we would call that. But you also don't want the opposite, which is what we would call the tragedy of the commons. In other words, the idea that the ownership is so spread out that, again, nobody cares because there's no hard work that goes into ownership. It's like children in a kindergarten class, right? You distribute the toys, and then when it's time to clean up, oh, it's Joe's, it's Mary's, it's John's duty to clean it up. So how do we create a system of equity and ownership that's not in one direction and not in the other? And so these are some of the fundamental kind of questions that we are working on in the health department. To move forward with some more of the specifics, I think it's glaringly obvious how mental health affects incarcerated persons, right? There's violence, there's isolation, there's limited prospects, and so forth. This could lead to, of course, PTSD, depression, anxiety, suicidality, hypervigilance. The list of consequences is frankly endless. But I think what's more apropos at this juncture is talking about the effects on children, the children of the incarcerated. And I think what's less commonly known is how much of a public health issue this is, not for those necessarily incarcerated, but for the entire society. So as Sherelle alluded to, the children of incarcerated often have a number of difficulties. They can experience a number of public health issues and whatnot. But I think it's very important. I don't necessarily want to go into all those particular details right here in public forum, but I think what's very important to note is that although the group as a demographic may be challenged, that does not say anything about the individual. And we have to remember that there is a difference when we're looking at public health as a populace, as a population, versus what one individual is capable of. And I think we have to keep those two things completely separate. But absolutely, the children of incarcerated parents face a plethora of mental health issues, and this is often the product of economic hardship. For instance, lack of transportation to medical appointments, child care, issues with paying for efficient child care or worthwhile child care. Lack of permanent housing can lead to abuse, to lack of a primary care physician, to lack of community cohesion, and so forth. So,
that's a great perspective. One more for you, Mr. David. What sort of community resources would be helpful to address this issue?
Yes, that is a great question. And ultimately, I think that community resources are one half of the equation, and they're extremely important. But I also think we need to lobby our federal system, because I think that, as again, the former police chief alluded to, he could do great work within the city of Detroit, but a lot of the mechanisms in terms of resources and funding and so forth come at a state or federal level that isn't necessarily the same profile as this city, as our city, as the city of Detroit. So I think that we have to have a combination of community effort as well as lobbying at state and federal levels. But some of the things that would go a long way are, for instance, a reduction in fee-for-service. So in some, incarceration systems, there's a fee that an individual has to pay, sometimes $3 to $5, just to seek mental health or any type of medical service. And this might be related to the excuse, at least, is that it will prevent false claims about medicine. There's also a lack of communication between providers and facility administrators within prison systems. We need to reduce solitary confinement and the horrible, mental health impacts that come from that. The United Nations has declared solitary confinement for any period of longer than 2 weeks to be cruel and unusual punishment. We need to have, an ability to receive federal benefits post-imprisonment. Medicaid, housing, Social Security, and a system for identification that is not roundabout, that takes all of these other resources here just to get a simple ID so that you could get a job, and then have that job may not necessarily even be a livable wage. Lastly, I think that we have to have grants for the children of incarcerated individuals so that they are not necessarily the double victims of this system, and we have to make sure that loans that are made available to those individuals potentially for college or higher education are non-predatory and at potentially lower interest rates than some other individuals.
All right, these are questions for Ms. Erin Key. First, introduce who you represent.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here. My name is Erin Keefe. I'm a staff attorney at the Detroit Justice Center in the Legal Service and Advocacy practice. At DJC, we do a host of different things across our practice groups, including working with area young people to host Know Your Rights trainings on everything from interacting with a police officer to ensuring you know your rights in housing cases, a plethora of different types of things. We also represent formerly incarcerated people in traffic misdemeanors, family court matters, so those who are coming home who owe substantial unbearable amounts of back-owed child support from their term of incarceration, illegal eviction matters where the police assisted with evictions, and that is unconstitutional. We also assist with litigation on a plethora of different topics with our area movement partners, some of whom are in the room today, on everything from the treatment of incarcerated people in jails during this COVID-19 pandemic, to the excessive charging of fines and fees, which I'll talk about in a minute, to even assisting with protester defense cases through some of our other community groups. And lastly, I would say we participate in legislative analysis on decriminalization matters that are coming through your legislature. So if you've seen things that have happened, we work collectively with community members on the ground to channel that change into new laws so that the things that are systemic don't continue to happen. And the last thing I just wanted to share that kind of illustrates the work we do is a client of mine. We'll call her Miss B for the purpose of this panel. But she was a single mom of 3 who lost her housing after an eviction. Then she couldn't afford rent after she lost her job. She lost her job after a cancer diagnosis. She was missing work for oncology appointments in the suburbs. She had to drive to get to these appointments, although she didn't have a valid license. So she had to transfer on 4 separate buses in order to get to these appointments while experiencing chemo and radiation. A single ticket she could not pay turned into a license suspension, which then led to misdemeanor offenses and a criminal record. And so by the time she came to us, the client was thousands of dollars in traffic court debt while battling cancer at the time that she needed our assistance. And so I just think that that story perfectly illustrates the work that we do, the fact that many of the people who have a criminal record in this community are not inherently dangerous or violent people. They are everyday people who are battling poverty, and I think that that is the mission of DJC, is to make our cities just and for people to be empowered that just because they're in a circumstance, it doesn't mean people won't reach out a hand to help them.
Another question for you. What are fines and fees, and how do they impact people caught in the criminal legal system?
Good question. So people use the term fines and fees quite a bit, and they use them interchangeably, but they're actually two different things. So fines and fees, both of them, are tools used by courts and municipalities and even states to generate revenue, so to make money from an accused or convicted person. I'll read that again. Fines and fees are tools that governments use to make money off of people who are accused of crimes or convicted of crimes, meaning you might owe a fee even if you're never found guilty of a crime. And I think that's a very important distinction because we commonly associate people having debt from the criminal legal system with having done something wrong or owing a debt to society, when in fact, cities are generating money from people who are accused of crime, okay? Fines are inherently punitive, whereas fees are typically tacked on penalties for a court-ordered activity. So a fine might be if you're found guilty in a case in order to pay $400 for a traffic stop from events stemming from that traffic stop. A fee is what happens after when you need to go get your license cleared and you have to pay an additional $150 fee or $45 fee to the court for them to process the fact that you've come and addressed your case. So typically, fees themselves become something that makes it all the more difficult to navigate a criminal case. They make it so it can feel impossible after you've already either pled guilty or been found not guilty to still owe money to the court that you don't have the ability to pay. And they essentially trap people in debt and keep them from being able to move forward with their lives. And the way we see this happen a lot is specifically in Michigan. Minor traffic offenses, not including DUIs, account for half of all criminal prosecutions in Michigan. 12% of all arrests of black men and 15% of all arrests of black women are for driving with a suspended license, compared to only 6% for white men and white women. So what that looks like is basically a lot of people who are black and brown end up trapped in a series of debt, all from a traffic offense. And when you have debt you cannot pay, when you're unable to get to work because you don't have a valid driver's license, that leads you to consider doing things like criminality that you would never have considered before because you're trying to navigate poverty and the criminal justice system. So that's fines and fees.
Very well put. Good answer. Last one for you. How are young people charged with a crime impacted by the criminal legal system?
So for this question, I actually pulled up a statistic, but I actually need a little group participation. So I see some young people in the room. I have a question for you all. How many of you have a police officer at your school? That's at your school. One. I see hands going up. The reason I'm asking you this question is because statistics show that 24% of elementary schools and 42% of high schools have a sworn law enforcement officer present. 1.6 million students attend schools with at least one officer, but no guidance counselor. That is so indicative of the problem and how the criminal legal system is just designed to literally take young people from the classroom into the prison system. I previously, prior to coming to DJC, practiced juvenile defense work and did a lot of work on juvenile policy reform. And I became really familiar with the collateral consequences of even a juvenile record, right? You're more likely to be suspended or expelled or experience other forms of exclusionary discipline that interrupt your education. There are reporting requirements that have to do with adjudication. So while the Common App recently got rid of the question asking specifically about a juvenile record, many of the schools, I think it's like 50% of colleges, still ask a question about that rule. And a lot of people think if you're in juvenile court that you're not required to disclose, but that is simply not true. There are various instances where an employer or a college can view your juvenile record. And lastly, it can hurt a lot of other ways that people don't consider, such as if you're pulled over as a minor for driving without a license, it can impede your ability to pursue getting a license when you are of driving age. And it also, again, just to reiterate, can cause that web of debt, of fines and fees when you are, charged as a minor, you don't handle it, and next thing you know, you have a collection as an adult that's messing up your credit record. So there are lots of ways that being charged as a young person can truly derail your life, but young people are resilient, and we see every day, as evidenced by the young lady sitting up here, that it important that when people in the community come together, when people in the community care about issues important to young people, that a juvenile record or any other limitation does not have to be a barrier to that person's success.
All right, I want to take this opportunity. I'm going to bring the previous panel up, and we're going to take a couple questions from the audience, because I know y'all may have a few questions. So, and get them answered if y'all have any. It's getting late, but, you know. Oh, yes. Anybody got any questions out there for these fine panelists?
So maybe we'll take like 3 questions. If anyone has any questions for the experience for any of our panelists, now's your time to ask. Do we have another mic?
I think I'll speak to that, and that's Laura's aunt. So Pure Heart, we provide financial support, and we provide support in the space of family reunification in that capacity. We have not figured out a way for us to plan a trip that will eliminate caregivers and stuff for going, and we can just take Laura ourselves and other scholars, but we can definitely continue to financially provide service and support to help Laura see her dad, and for any other scholars that needs to see their parent that's incarcerated as well. Yeah.
I just want to add something really quickly. I know that there's no substitute for in-person visits, but in my experience as an attorney and working with incarcerated people, I believe in mail. And so I feel like sending letters and photos and like hand-drawn from a child to their parent or loved one is something that really means a lot, and also is something that the person can keep even if they can't see each other. And so I think that there are like smaller like things like that you can do. And then also, I think I do not support this, but I think the Michigan Department of Corrections is gonna start having video visits. Oh, okay. And so that's another, again, there's absolutely no substitute, but it is a way for people, because also, sorry, but Michigan's so big, and people don't understand that, like, you can be in the Upper Peninsula, which is like a different time zone, and like many people don't have the resources to like rent a car, get a hotel, like make a whole trip, cross the bridge to get up there. Like, it's a whole thing. And so I deeply empathize with that, but I do think there are smaller things that you can do to keep those bonds maintained.
And I just want to make a small comment to that. Letter writing and sending photos and creating ways that they can communicate and keep that communication line open is so critical. But it's so critical to a young person to be able to physically see their parent. So providing resources and services that ensures that helps both of the parents. It's nothing like a letter, but it's nothing like embracing your parent. It's nothing like giving them a hug and, you know, looking in their eyes and getting that reassurance that, you know, you still care. Even though you're away, I still have your support. So it's very critical that we combine both of those avenues for our young people. So getting them to the correctional facilities to see their parent is so critical, and it can go so much further.
And if I can add very quickly, that's why political advocacy is very important as well. When I was chief of police, I got into a public spat with Governor Schneider when he closed the Mound Road facility, because we had a number of disenfranchised residents that the only way they could visit with their loved one, they were right down the street from Mound Road. They displaced those citizens. And we gotta change our nomenclature as well. They're not prisoners. They displaced our citizens and moved them away and made it much more difficult for our kids to have a connection with their parents. So we need to really be advocates in the governor's office as well, because corrections falls directly in the purview of the state.
And also, and I promise this is my last comment, they're so strategic on the placement of these individuals. They know they have families and will place them hours away to make it almost impossible for them to get visitations. And that causes mental health issues. There's so many layers that come behind a person not even being able to be visited by their family. So that's a systemic racism thing and a criminal justice thing that's coming again. Exactly.
If I may address that also, you know, we have that Connecting Families campaign because we do understand how important it is. And we were speaking to some people from Tom Gore's team that own Securus, one of the phone companies, and you know the exorbitant cost of those phone calls. Absolutely. And so when we was telling him about, you know, the problem people were having staying connected with their family, he was like, I'd love to talk to some of those people. I was like, they love to talk to you too if they could afford to call you, you know. And also there's prison gerrymandering where they move a lot of us across the bridge and they count us as residents as the places to where we're incarcerated, and they get all type of revenue and political appointments based on the fact that they counting us as residents there, and they know we're not welcome there as anything other than the prisoners, and we're not going to return to there when we get out, you know. So we are actually advocating for a change in the prison gerrymandering. We hope that will stop them from sending so many of us over the bridge. I was over the bridge a few times. There were so many people from Detroit there till we called everybody else out-of-towners, you know. It was like, you know, and like you said, it's just too difficult for somebody to come visit you, especially if they have kids, you know. Yeah.
Can I address your niece for a second? Excuse me, baby. The one thing I need you to know is that your father still loves you. And whether you see him once a week or maybe once a year, he's still your father and he still wants the best for you. And the only thing you can do is be real with him. Always be honest about what you're feeling. Be honest about what's happening to you. And don't hide nothing, because he's still your father and he still wants the best for you. And I'm going to keep praying, because I want y'all to be reunited soon.
That was a great first question. Thank you for asking that. We have time for about two more, so we had one over here.
Question is for Aaron Keith. So at what age or would you help someone if they needed some help?
So to repeat the question, you said at what age can someone be represented? So typically, if you are accused of a crime as a juvenile, then you would be entitled to representation. Every state and every municipality is a little bit different about at what point a person can actually come in and represent you. It varies. For some people, it's at the very first hearing. For some people, they might appoint someone who's there at the jail. So it really just depends. But a larger and I think equally important fact is at what age should young people start learning about their rights, so that if they are ever in a situation where they encounter a police officer or they are charged with a crime, they already know what things not to do. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a young person give a statement to a principal or give a statement to a school resource officer, not realizing that that individual is affiliated with law enforcement or has a duty to report or things like that. So I think that the earlier you can teach children basic things like, I do not consent to a search, I want an attorney, I want my mom. The earlier that you can teach that and make it age appropriate, the better, so that when a person does have to represent them, they already know. They're telling the attorney, they tried to get me to make a statement without you here, and I told them I wasn't going to do that. Or they coerced me, you know, they threatened me. that is so important that they understand their rights from a very early age.
Well, we definitely have information here available to you, and we're always looking for community partners and service providers to help us identify young people that experience parental incarceration. So I'll definitely get some information to you.
And then very quickly to your point about law enforcement, we have to reorient what law enforcement does with our young people. And we criminalize a lot of behaviors that are not criminal behaviors, and we start young people down a track that they shouldn't go down. So that comes, though, from some state intervention that we really need relative to MCOs and certification of police officers, because as Counselor had mentioned, and I was Chief of Police of Detroit Public Schools Community District as well. When I left there, I was very purposeful in leaving because that's an entity that needs to be defunded. That $15 to $20 million would be much better served to go towards social workers, would be much better served to go mental health supports. Now, can they do it tomorrow? Probably not. But my goal was to defund it, so I don't think people want to work on a police department that the chief is working to get rid of. So, but we do need to march in that direction.
Can I just add something really quickly? I think that you have an important perspective, and someone was talking earlier about like what can the community do. I think people in your role going to legislators and saying this is what I'm seeing and this is what we need could go very far, especially since the Michigan Department of Corrections has around, at least at one point their budget was around $2 billion. And I think that like it costs $35,000 a year to incarcerate a person in this state. Like, what if we did something else with that money that actually helped families stay together and served communities and was informed by the people who are experiencing these systems? And so I think that people using their voices to raise consciousness and to advocate for what they actually need is something we really, really, really need in our society and in our state.
All right, give it up for the panelists one more time. And I just want to reiterate that mass incarceration is a problem, not just a problem in Detroit, but all the way around the country. And I want to thank everybody for coming out with support tonight, you know, with my team, Ms. Chelsea Phillips and the Flowers of Future Foundation, Sherelle of the Pure Heart Foundation, and Dr. Hayward here with the Player Coalition. Thank y'all. I also want to thank all the people out here doing all the groundwork, you know, to go out and make this world a better place. So, if you're wondering what you can do today, I encourage you to follow up with everyone's website. Just continue to familiarize yourself with the website and how to help. And for me, it's important to not only talk about it, but be about it. So with that, you know, I want to give it to my team, Chelsea, to do the introduction.
Thank you so much, Trey. Thank you all so much for coming out. We are so excited to plan this event. I believe we started having conference calls maybe the beginning of July. When Trey came to Detroit in 2019, one of the first things he told me, I serve as his publicist, one of the first things he told me is we need to find organizations that we're going to partner with. And obviously, as a father of 3, he's very passionate about the children and putting his work you know, where it will best benefit the children. So with that being said, I literally have chills because I know Sherelle has no idea that Trey wanted to make a donation to Pure Heart Foundation in the amount of $5,000. One of the first things that Sherelle explained to me when we were having the conversation, I'm from Georgia, and none of my family members, none of my immediate family has been incarcerated, so it's not anything that I'm too familiar with. But one of the first things that she did tell me was it cost for these kids to even have a phone conversation with their parents. And I was like, wow, that's really deep. So as soon as we got off the phone, I called Trey. I'm like, Trey, we have to make a donation. Obviously, it's coming from you and your foundation, so you decide what the amount is. And he called me back after he looked at the breakdown that Sherelle sent. I think it's 15 cents a minute for children to talk to their parents, their incarcerated parents. So we wanted to just make a small dent to the children here represented so that they are in a position to talk to their family and their loved ones that are behind bars. So thank you all so much. And Sherelle, if we can grab a quick picture with you at the front.
All right. Thanks, everybody. It was a great evening. Shout out to the kids. I follow y'all, you know. Yeah, shout out y'all. Yeah, they wanted a shout out, so. But thanks to everybody for coming out. Obviously, you know, it's very dear to me that, you know, we get this conversation started. So, great night. We got food. No more food. We still got food. All right. You know, like they say in church, y'all go eat, you know. So, but thanks, everybody. And, yeah.